The ultimate showdown. The arena was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Massive stone walls surrounded the vast pit, and the crowd was hushed, eagerly waiting for what was about to unfold. In the center stood the protagonist, a lone warrior, her back straight, eyes fixed on the beast in front of her. She was small, but her presence was undeniable. She had faced many challenges in her life, but nothing like this. The arena had been set for her execution. The crowd was filled with dangerous apex predators who had never seen anyone survive their trials. They gathered to cheer for her downfall, to witness her fail. After all, she was just a human, a weakling compared to the monstrous creatures she now stood before. The opponent? A massive creature with sleek scales, its eyes glowing red with hunger. Its claws were sharp enough to tear through steel, and its body rippled with power. It was the perfect predator, a creature made to hunt and destroy. The crowd roared with excitement, their cheers echoing through the arena. It was a battle to the death, and everyone knew who would win. But as the creature took a step forward, something unexpected happened. The warrior, instead of backing down or showing fear, stood taller. Her heart raced, but her expression remained calm. She wasn't here to die. She wasn't here to lose. The predator lunged forward, claws outstretched, aiming for the warrior's throat. The crowd gasped as the beast's speed was almost too fast to track. In the blink of an eye, the warrior was on the move. She ducked under the attack, rolling across the ground in a move that stunned everyone. She moved with a grace that didn't belong in this cruel, brutal world. The predator growled in frustration, stepping back to strike again. This time the warrior was ready. She had learned to read the beast's movements, to predict its next move. As the creature swung its claws once more, she shifted her weight and dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the deadly strike. The crowd grew silent in disbelief. They had never seen someone dodge the beast's attacks, let alone survive this long. Was she really going to do the impossible? Was she actually surviving? The predator roared, furious, and charged again. But this time, the warrior was ready. She leaped toward the beast, catching it off guard. With swift precision, she grabbed one of its massive claws and twisted, throwing the creature off balance. It stumbled, momentarily vulnerable. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow down. The warrior's eyes locked on the predator's exposed side. She saw the weakness, the opening. Without hesitation, she struck, driving her blade into the creature's side. A final, decisive blow. The predator let out a pained roar before collapsing to the ground, defeated. The crowd went deathly silent. It wasn't the roar of triumph they expected. Instead, it was a stunned, shocked silence. They had never witnessed anything like this. The apex predator, the unstoppable force, was lying motionless on the ground. And the woman, the human, stood victorious. The warrior took a breath, looking at the fallen creature, her chest rising and falling with each breath. This was just the beginning. She had proven that she wasn't like the others. She was something different, something more. And the crowd? They had no idea what was coming next. They had just witnessed a new kind of power rise from the dust. What would she do now? Would she stand tall as a conqueror or fall as a symbol of rebellion? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. The arena had just seen a new kind of champion. The unseen power. The silence in the arena hung like a thick fog, stifling every breath. The warrior stood over the defeated predator, her chest heaving. With exhaustion, the crowd had fallen into a stunned stillness, eyes wide, mouths agape. They had expected her to be torn apart, but instead, they witnessed an unexpected victory, one that no one had foreseen. The predator, the king of beasts, lay motionless at her feet, a symbol of her unexpected strength. But what was truly astonishing was not just the defeat of the beast, it was the look in her eyes. As she stood there, victorious, her expression was not one of pride or relief, but something else, something far deeper. It was as though a flicker of something ancient, something primal, had awakened within her. The warriors and predators in the stands could feel it too. That subtle shift, in the air, It was almost as if the earth itself had recognized her as something more than a mere human, something that defied the laws of nature. No one could quite put their finger on it, but there was a power in her, something they hadn't expected to see in a creature as fragile as her. As she stood there gazing down at her fallen opponent, the air around her seemed to change. It wasn't the normal victory rush that warriors usually felt after a kill. It was something deeper, something instinctive. Her body didn't shake with the thrill of survival, nor did her pulse quicken with the adrenaline of the fight. It was as though the warrior had tapped into something far beyond herself, a hidden power. The crowd began to stir, murmuring among themselves. Was it just her skill? Or was there something more? Her victory didn't just come from strength or speed. It was something else, something far more ancient. She had not only survived, she had commanded the battle. In the shadows of the arena, those who watched from the higher tiers, the other apex predators, exchanged uneasy glances. For centuries they had ruled unchallenged, their strength unmatched, their power unquestioned. But now they saw in her the spark of something they had never anticipated. A warrior who could not be measured by the same standards, a force of nature that defied their understanding. The ground trembled ever so slightly beneath her feet, but it wasn't the echo of her victory. No, this was something else, something alive. Deep within her, something had stirred. She could feel it, the stirrings of a power that she had never understood but now recognized. It was calling to her, pulling at her very soul, urging her to stand tall, to take her place among the apex predators as their equal, or perhaps even their superior. Her hand clenched around the blade she had used to defeat the creature, and for a fleeting moment she felt it, an ancient energy running through her veins. It was a feeling she couldn't describe, but one she couldn't ignore. The truth was undeniable. Something had changed within her. This was no longer just a battle for survival. She had awakened a power that had been dormant for so long, waiting for the right moment to rise. The crowd's whispers grew louder, their excitement palpable. They didn't understand what had happened, but they could sense the shift. The warrior wasn't just a human. She was something more. And as the seconds ticked by, the arena's energy began to change, filling with a sense of awe and anticipation, a sense that the rules of this world were about to be rewritten. The first kill, the dust still hung in the air, the echoes of the battle vibrating through the vast arena. The apex predator lay motionless at her feet, its blood seeping into the cracked earth. The silence was deafening, almost unnatural. The crowd, once filled with bloodthirsty cheers, now seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the next move. The warrior, her heart still pounding in her chest, stood frozen. It wasn't that she was celebrating her victory. There was no time for that. She was not sure what had just happened, but the power she felt coursing through her was undeniable. For a moment, she stared down at the beast's lifeless body, unsure whether to be shocked by her own strength or to embrace the strange new force stirring within her. The predator's massive form, once a symbol of dominance, now seemed almost fragile in comparison. Its fangs, once sharp enough to rip through armor, lay dull and lifeless on the ground. The beast had been powerful, yes, but in the face of her newfound abilities it seemed small, insignificant even. And then, just as the silence began to stretch on, a sound broke through, the first tentative applause. The ripple of claps began as the warriors and predators in the stands slowly came to their senses. They hadn't just witnessed a victory, they had seen an impossible feat. A human, no less, had done what no one thought was possible. She had killed an apex predator, and not just any predator, but one of the fiercest and most feared creatures in existence. The applause grew louder, a mixture of disbelief and awe. The warrior's head snapped up, her eyes scanning the crowd. The cheers were now thunderous, but they weren't just for her strength. They were for the power she had shown, the fearlessness in her heart, the determination in her eyes. But as the cheers echoed around her, something inside her shifted again. The applause no longer felt like a celebration. It felt hollow. The victory, while undeniable, didn't bring the satisfaction she expected. The taste of triumph was bitter, and the cheers of the crowd felt distant. The arena's leaders, the very creatures who had once ruled this world, sat frozen in disbelief, unsure how to respond. One by one they exchanged looks, eyes filled with a mix of respect, fear, and suspicion. They had always ruled by power and dominance, their reign unchallenged for centuries. But now, a human had shattered that notion, and the implications were too vast to comprehend. Her breathing steadied, and she realized what was missing: the purpose. She hadn't just come here to survive. She hadn't just fought for her life. No, the battle was something more, something deeper. She had done what was necessary, yes, but what now? What would she do with this power? Without a word, she turned her back on the crowd, her footsteps echoing across the arena. She had no need for their approval. She had no need for their applause. There was something greater at stake now. She had won this battle, but the war was far from over. As she walked away from the fallen predator, the crowd's cheers began to fade into the background. Her heart, though still racing, had found its purpose. She was not just fighting to survive. She was fighting to change everything. Behind her, the apex predators, once the undisputed kings of this world, looked on in awe and fear. The truth was clear now. She wasn't just another warrior. She was a force of nature, something they had never expected to face. And they had no idea how to deal with the aftermath of what had just happened. The crowning, the ground beneath her. Feet trembled, not from the force of battle, but from the weight of an ancient tradition being rewritten. The crowd's cheers had barely begun to settle when a new, chilling silence swept over the arena. Every eye, from the lowliest predator to the highest ruler, turned toward her. She could feel their gaze, heavy with awe, suspicion, and something deeper, fear. But the fear wasn't from her strength. It wasn't from her swift and deadly movements, nor from her defiance in the face of death. No, the fear was of something they couldn't name, something far more unsettling than a simple human warrior. And that's when it happened. A figure stepped forward from the shadows, the highest of the apex predators, the ones who ruled over the land with untouchable power. The elders. Their presence filled the arena with a strange, oppressive energy. One of them, the oldest and most revered, raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. "You have done the impossible," his voice echoed deep and ancient, carrying across the silent crowd. "You have slain the predator that no one thought could be slain." His gaze locked onto hers, and for the first time the warrior felt a flicker of doubt stir in her. Was this a trap? Was this a test? But instead of the expected condemnation or further challenges, the elder's face shifted, his expression no longer one of judgment. There was respect in his eyes. And then, a command. "Bring forth the crown." The words were simple, but they struck her like a thunderbolt. She didn't understand. The crown was not a mere trinket. It was the symbol of ultimate power, the mark of a ruler who commanded not just the creatures of the arena but the very land itself. It was reserved for those who had conquered everything and everyone in their path. And yet, here she stood, a human, with no history among the predators, no right to such a title. As the crown was brought forward, a hush fell over the crowd. The gold glinted in the sunlight, but there was nothing warm about it. The crown was forged from the bones of ancient creatures, adorned with the skulls of those who had dared to challenge the power of the apex predators. It was not just a symbol, it was a legacy, a lineage passed down through blood and brutality. But now the impossible was happening. The crown was being placed in her hands, not as a trophy of victory, but as a mark of power. "You have earned this," the elder continued, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "You are not just a survivor. You are the new ruler, the queen of the apex predators." His words hung in the air like a spell, and as they settled in, a shiver ran down her spine. She had not only won, She had conquered the very heart of their world. The warriors around her, those who had once cheered for her execution, now knelt. One by one, they lowered their heads in deference. The arena, which had been filled with the sound of wild celebration moments before, was now dead silent, save for the soft rustle of her cloak as she stood at the center of it all. She had never asked for this. She had never sought power, had never dreamt of ruling. Her battle had always been one for survival, for freedom from the chains that bound her. But now, with the weight of the crown in her hands, she realized that she was no longer just a warrior. She was something more, something different. As she looked out over the sea of predators, her heart, once filled with uncertainty, now found clarity. She had not just defeated a beast. She had awakened something within herself, something primal, something ancient. She had claimed her place among the apex. The crowd, still kneeling, waited for her to speak, but words failed her. What could she say? What could she do when the world she knew was now irrevocably changed? The only thing she could do was raise the crown above her head, the symbol of her new reign, and let the silence speak for itself. The journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but one thing was certain: this world would never be the same again. And she, the unlikely queen, would see it change. The true test. The crown sat heavy on her brow, its weight not only physical, but symbolic of the daunting path ahead. The arena, now eerily quiet, felt as if it were holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. She had defeated the apex predator, earned the crown, and claimed her place at the top of the food chain. But despite the cheers and the respect, there was an undeniable truth that lingered in the air. Her victory was only the beginning. The true test had just begun. The crowd, still kneeling, watched her with a mix of awe and wariness. They had seen strength before, but they had never seen this, a human who had brought down the strongest of their kind. Yet strength alone was never enough to rule. It was leadership, power over minds as well as bodies, that would determine her fate. She was no longer just a fighter. She was a ruler now, and the predators who surrounded her were not going to follow her simply because she had slain one of their own. They respected strength, but they would test her, push her, and force her to prove that she was worthy of the crown. One of the elders, the one who had placed the crown upon her head, stepped forward, his ancient eyes piercing. "You have taken the first step," he said, his voice heavy with meaning. "But to rule this world, to command the loyalty of the apex predators, you must prove that you are not just a survivor. You must show that you have the cunning, the wisdom, and the will to lead us all." A chill ran through her. The weight of his words was more crushing than the crown itself. This wasn't just about surviving the battle or winning the crown. It was about surviving as the queen, earning her place every day, not with violence, but with strategy, leadership, and strength of mind. "You will face the trials of the apex," the elder continued, his tone unwavering. "You will be tested in ways you cannot imagine, and only if you pass will you truly earn the right to rule us." The trials of the apex were notorious, spoken of only in whispers among the strongest of the predators. It wasn't just physical combat that awaited her, but challenges designed to break even the most seasoned warrior, tests of leadership, of resolve, and of intelligence. It was said that no one had ever completed all the trials. She could feel the eyes of the predators on her now, those who had once looked upon her with disdain and hatred, now full of expectation. This was no longer a fight for survival. It was a fight for her place, for her right to call herself their queen. The first trial would take place in the heart of the forbidden forest, a labyrinth of dense, dark trees where the fiercest creatures roamed. It was said that those who entered never came out, their bones left to bleach in the open air. But she would have to enter it and survive if she hoped to prove her worth. Her mind raced as she considered the challenge ahead. She wasn't just facing wild beasts or physical threats. She was facing the very fabric of what it meant to lead, to rule. And for that, she needed more than just strength. She needed to understand the creatures she was leading, understand the very power that lay in the balance of life and death in this brutal world. The warriors around her, once brimming with confidence, now seemed to step back. Their loyalty was no longer guaranteed. They were waiting, watching. They wanted to see if she could survive the trials, if she could truly become the queen they had crowned. For the first time since the battle, a feeling of doubt stirred deep within her. She had never wanted to be a queen. She had never asked for this crown, this responsibility. But now it was hers, and the only way forward was through the trials. There was no turning back. With a deep breath, she turned towards the elder, her voice steady but resolute. I accept the trials. I will prove that I am worthy of this crown. The elder nodded, and for the first time a flicker of respect passed between them. The true test would begin not in the arena but in the wilderness. And only by surviving the trials, and more importantly, by proving that she could lead, would she earn her place as queen. As the first trial loomed on the horizon, she knew one thing for certain. This was her fight, and she would face it head-on, no matter the cost. The betrayal night had fallen, and with it came a silence far colder than before. The moon hung above the jagged cliffs like a single pale eye, watching her from the dark sky. The warrior, now queen in name, sat alone at the edge of the apex, citadel, overlooking the vast lands she had never asked to rule. The wind whispered through the stone halls, but something else lingered in the air tonight. Something wrong. She had passed the first of the trials. She had entered the forbidden forest, faced horrors that clawed at the mind as much as the body, and returned bearing the mark of victory. The predators had begun to lower their heads when she passed. The whispers had turned to nods. They were beginning to believe in her. But not all. Deep within the shadows of her court, jealousy festered, and betrayal was waiting. Not from the outside, but from within the very circle that had once helped lift the crown onto her head. He was one of the highborns, an apex elite named Vale. He had fought beside her during her first trial, offered advice, pledged loyalty, even smiled in her presence. But he did not see her as a queen. He saw her as a mistake. A glitch in the Yao natural order, a human in a seat reserved for gods. To him, her strength was an insult, her crown, a scar on their traditions, and he would rather see the world burn than let her rule it. The first sign came as whispers from the training grounds. 2 young predators, found dead, their throats slit with surgical precision. No beast had done it. No wild creature. It was an execution, clean, silent, deliberate. She sensed it. She had lived too long among liars and monsters not to recognize when one was circling close. Still, she kept calm. She didn't strike first. She waited. But the second sign was not subtle. One of her food stores, poisoned, 3 loyal guards missing. Her messages intercepted, and then came the ambush. It happened in the Echo Hall, a ceremonial chamber where she was meant to address the tribes. She entered through the archway, and the trap sprung. The lights dimmed and a roar echoed from the shadows. Vael stepped forward, his blade drawn, flanked by others, those who still refused to kneel. You were never one of us, he growled, circling her. You were a spark, but even sparks die out. She didn't speak. She didn't flinch. Instead, she stared into his eyes, and in that silence, something inside her flared again. The same ancient energy that had awoken in the arena surged through her veins. You're right, she said, her voice cold as steel. I'm not one of you, I'm something far worse. And then she moved, not like a queen, not like a warrior, but like a storm. The battle was not grand, it was brutal, fast. Her blade danced with a grace born of desperation and clarity. The floor ran red within minutes. One by one, the traitors fell, except Vael. He escaped into the shadows, vanishing like a ghost with a vow on his lips. This isn't over. And she believed him. When the dust settled, she stood again in a broken hall, not as a ruler celebrated by cheers, but as a queen forged by betrayal. The crown still rested on her head, but now she knew. Power didn't just attract followers, it attracted threats. The trials were not the only test. Sometimes the true danger wore a smile and walked beside you, and the war for the throne had only just begun. The final battle. The moon hung low in the sky, blood-red and foreboding, as if the heavens themselves were watching the world below with a gaze of impending judgment. The citadel, once a place of uneasy peace, now pulsed with a restless energy. The tension was thick, the air heavy with the scent of anticipation and smoke. The true battle was coming, not just a fight for survival, but a battle for the soul of the land itself. The queen stood alone atop the highest balcony, looking down upon the vast, sprawling landscape below. Her heart was a thunderous beat, her mind clear but heavy. She had survived the trials of the apex. She had proven herself, but it hadn't been enough. Vial's betrayal had cracked the illusion of loyalty that had once surrounded her. She had learned the hard way that strength alone could not keep her place among the apex predators. But it was more than that. It was the understanding that this world, this brutal kingdom, was never going to kneel easily. She had killed Vial's allies, crushed their insurrection, but Vial himself was still out there, waiting, plotting, and gathering forces in the shadows. He had not forgotten his goal: to see her dethroned, to see her reign reduced to nothing more than a fleeting moment in the bloodied pages of history. And now, the time for subtlety was over. The first crack in the silence came from the distant hills, rumbling hooves, the heavy stomp of an army in motion. Vial had returned, not as a ghost, but as a warlord. He had rallied the remaining factions who had once sworn loyalty to her, twisting their doubts and fears into an alliance. His army was vast, hungry, brutal, and united by one common goal: to tear her down and claim the throne for themselves. She felt it in her bones, the weight of what was coming. It wasn't just a battle of soldiers. It was a clash of ideologies, a war for the future of this land. Would it remain ruled by the brutal ancient ways, or would it be reshaped by something new, something fierce and unrelenting, yet fundamentally different? The queen didn't hesitate. She rallied her own forces, those who had remained loyal despite the betrayals, those who believed in her vision of change. They were fewer in number, but they were stronger. They were fighters, survivors, those who had seen the darkness of this world and chose to stand against it. Her generals stood at her side, weapons drawn, eyes burning with the same fire that had carried them through the trials. The battlefield was set, an ancient, cracked plain between the citadel and Vial's army. The wind whispered like a prelude to disaster, stirring the banners that flapped fiercely in the cold breeze. The queen stood at the forefront, not as a monarch awaiting tribute, but as a warrior in her own right, ready to lead her people into the storm. The first clash was deafening. Metal screamed as swords met shields, as the forces collided in a blur of chaos and rage. She fought with the same precision that had brought her here, carving her way through the battlefield, leading with a brutality that surprised even her. Her enemies fell before her, one by one, their resistance crumbling under the weight of her will. But Vial was not easy prey. He moved like a shadow, swift and elusive, cutting through her forces with lethal efficiency. The queen could feel him, drawing closer, the familiar presence of her betrayer in the distance, but she didn't flinch. She would face him just as she had faced every other challenge, head on. Finally, after hours of relentless fighting, the battlefield cleared just enough for their eyes to meet. Vial stood across from her, his face twisted in a smile of bitter triumph. "You think you can change this world?" he spat. "You think they will follow you? You're nothing more than a temporary flicker of rebellion, and you'll burn just as quickly." The queen's heart beat steady, her gaze unwavering. "This world is already broken, Vial," she said, her voice cold and powerful. "I'm not here to change it. I'm here to destroy the old world and build a new one. With a roar, Vial lunged, his blade flashing in the dim light. But the queen was faster. She parried his strike with practiced ease, stepping into him with a deadly precision that sent shockwaves through the ground beneath their feet. They fought like two predators in a battle for survival, every move calculated, every strike deadly. The world around them seemed to vanish as they became the center of the storm, their weapons clashing like thunder. For a moment it seemed as though Vial might win. His speed and ferocity were unmatched, but the queen had learned something in the trials, something he hadn't. She had learned not just to fight, but to adapt. With a swift motion, she disarmed him, her blade cutting through the air in a flash. Vial staggered back, his eyes wide in disbelief, but the queen didn't stop. With one final powerful blow, she struck him down. The battlefield fell silent. Vial lay at her feet, defeated. The crown, which had once seemed like an impossible dream, was now a reality, one forged in blood, sweat, and sacrifice. The predators, who had once stood against her watching from the sidelines, now lowered their heads in reverence. The queen had won, but it was more than just a victory. It was a revolution, and the world would never be the same again. As the sun began to rise over the battlefield, casting its first light on the blood-soaked earth, the queen stood tall. She had proven herself, not just as a warrior, but as a leader. And she knew that this was only the beginning.